The emergency beacon had been silent for 3 cycles when Elsa finally gave up waiting for rescue. Her survey pod had crashed on Kepler 442b during what should have been a routine atmospheric scan, and now she sat in the wreckage surrounded by the planet's most curious inhabitants. They looked like a cross between Earth's wolves and oversized otters, with sleek fur that shimmered between silver and blue. The locals, she'd started calling them Keplers, had been watching her from a distance since the crash. Their large, intelligent eyes tracked her every movement, but they never came close. Until today, Elsa had managed to salvage her emergency rations processor, a compact unit that could transform the basic protein paste into something resembling actual food. She was tired of eating bland survival bars. If she was going to be stranded, she was going to eat properly. She punched in the commands for her grandmother's chicken soup recipe, or at least the closest approximation the processor could manage. The unit hummed to life, and within minutes steam began rising from the heating chamber. The aroma of herbs, vegetables, and synthesized poultry filled the clearing around her damaged pod. That's when she noticed the Keplers emerging from the forest. First came the cubs, smaller versions of the adults, with oversized paws and ears too big for their heads. They crept forward on their bellies, noses twitching frantically. Behind them, the adults watched with a mixture of caution and fascination. One cub, braver than the rest, approached with something clutched in its mouth. It dropped the object at Elsa's feet, a carved wooden bowl surprisingly well crafted. Elsa stared. "You've got to be kidding me." The cub sat back on its haunches, eyes fixed on the soup processor. Another cub scurried forward, adding its own bowl to the collection. Then another. Within moments, Elsa was surrounded by a semicircle of cubs, each with their own container. Bowls, hollowed gourds, even what looked like woven baskets sealed with tree sap. "This is insane," Elsa muttered, but she couldn't help smiling. The cubs' expressions were so earnest, so hopeful, that she found herself ladling soup into the first bowl. The brave cub that had approached first carefully picked up its now full bowl and carried it back a few paces. It set the bowl down, sniffed cautiously, then began to lap at the liquid. Its ears perked up immediately, and it made a chirping sound that seemed to communicate pure joy. The other cubs erupted into excited yips and chatters, pushing their bowls closer to Elsa. All right, one at a time." She laughed, the sound surprising her. She hadn't laughed since the crash. As she filled bowl after bowl, the adult Keplers began approaching. They moved with more dignity than the cubs, but their interest was just as obvious. One particularly large individual, Elsa mentally dubbed him Leo, based on the magnificent mane of fur around his neck, sat at the edge of the gathering and observed. When all the cubs had been served, Leo rose and walked forward. He carried no bowl. Instead, he approached the soup processor itself, examining it with careful sniffs. Then he looked at Elsa, and she could have sworn she saw understanding in those amber eyes. "You want to know how it works, don't you?" she asked softly. Leo tilted his head, a gesture so human-like it startled her. Elsa made a decision that probably violated a dozen first contact protocols. She gestured for Leo to come closer, then pointed at the control panel. "This button starts the heating cycle. This one selects the recipe. And this," she pulled out the protein paste cartridge, "is the base ingredient." Leo watched intently as she demonstrated each step, preparing another batch of soup. His eyes followed her movements, and when she finished, he made a low, rumbling sound that the other adults seemed to understand. Several of them approached, also observing the process. Over the following days, a routine developed. Elsa would prepare her meals, and the Keplers would gather. She experimented with different recipes from Earth's vast culinary database: pasta with tomato sauce, curries, stews, even something approximating pizza. The Keplers sampled everything, their preferences quickly becoming apparent. The cubs loved anything sweet or savory. The adults preferred complex herb-heavy dishes, but something else was happening too. The Keplers began bringing her things: strange fruits from the forest, roots that turned out to be edible and delicious, even small game animals. They were sharing their food with her, just as she shared hers with them. Leo became her constant companion. He would sit beside her as she worked on repairing her communications array, occasionally bringing her tools that had scattered during the crash. He seemed to understand that she was trying to fix something, trying to go home. On the 10th day, Elsa's communicator crackled to life. Survey Pod 7, this is Rescue Vessel Odyssey. Do you copy? Yes, I copy. Elsa grabbed the receiver, her hands shaking. This is Elsa Chen, I'm alive, and she stopped. The Keplers had gathered around her pod, as they did every evening for dinner. The cubs sat in their usual spots, bowls at the ready. Leo stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his fur. Stand by. Pod 7. We'll have you out of there in 2 hours. Elsa looked at the assembled Keplers, at the community that had formed around something as simple as shared meals. She thought about the report she would file, the protocols that would be established, the scientists who would descend on this place. Odyssey, requesting permission to extend my stay for proper documentation purposes. I've made first contact with an intelligent species, and I believe we've established a successful communication foundation through, she smiled at Leo, culinary exchange. As rescue approached, Elsa prepared one final grand meal, a feast with every recipe she'd discovered the Keplers loved. They gathered around, cubs and adults together, bowls ready. In that moment, Elsa understood something fundamental about humanity's place in the cosmos. Sometimes the most profound connections weren't made through technology or language, but through the universal act of breaking bread, or in this case, sharing soup together. Leo settled beside her as they ate, and somewhere in the forest more Keplers emerged, drawn by the smell of human cooking and the promise of community it represented.